All right. So I just put a little bit of a presentation together. So I'm the chair of the governance committee for the SRPC, and we've been working hard at some bylaw updates for the organization over this past year. I thought I'd just start with a bit of a land acknowledgement. There's people joining from different parts of this wonderful country, and I think just taking a moment to reflect on the lands that we're on. This is up in Iqaluit, one of the places that I live and work and learn, and just sort of recognizing the Indigenous peoples who are caretakers of the land and have such deep knowledge about the land and how to survive in some of the weather that we've been experiencing. And even I'm on the East Coast right now and digging out after a giant snowstorm. And so, yes, it can be hard sometimes doing that, but there is such beauty out there as well. And so hopefully when we go out on the land and reflect on the people who have taken care of it and the privilege that we have to be on these lands and learn from them. Also to think about all the beauty around there, as well as some of that turmoil of digging out from the snow or the cold. So I also just wanted to acknowledge the governance committee members who've put a lot of work into this and have really given some very excellent guidance and feedback as we really try to move the SRPC into a place where, as we see our sort of role expanding and we're seeking out more opportunities for partnership and that we're really in a good place as an organization. So we have some representation from the current executive, some of the membership, student and resident member, folks from the SRPC Council, as well as nominations and awards who have all really contributed to this important work. So a huge thank you to them. Couldn't have done this without them. All of the work that I'm presenting this evening has also now been reviewed and approved by both exec and council. And so we're hoping to bring this to the AGM at our conference in April. So I thought I might just start with a little bit of a background on why this was needed. I am a past president of the SRPC, and I think during some of my time there, I started to sort of reflect on the fact that our current governance structures were maybe not fully in compliance with the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. Sometimes it was unclear in terms of who was responsible for decision making, and really saw an opportunity to strengthen some of that work and to make it more effective. To provide the oversight and risk management that is really part of us governing the SRPC as a non-profit organization, especially as we expand out with some of our projects. We want to make sure that this is all really well aligned. So in this presentation, I'm going to walk through some of the changes and updates and highlight kind of key areas. And then certainly at the end, if there's any questions on anything, I'm happy to try to answer them. So sort of brief summary of what's going to be changing. So I think the biggest thing is that we're moving from a council managed model to a board of directors. And so it's really this board of directors that will be the one who's responsible for the legal, financial, and strategic oversight of the organization. We are still proposing that council remain, but their role within the organization is going to shift a little bit. So still remaining really relevant to the work that we're doing at the SRPC, but having the board really focused on those sort of decision-making capacities. A few things that aren't changing, and this is really important, I think, when it comes to the bylaws and the voting process and that kind of thing. So we are not doing anything in terms of changes to membership categories or dues. The voting rights of members and what is sort of the things that we've been asking members to vote on versus not, none of those elements within the bylaws have changed. And for the most part, the process that we're using for nominations has not been proposed to change. We are still, relying heavily on the Nominations and Awards Committee to review applicants and put forward names that would be approved at the AGM. And so a lot of those processes really haven't changed. I'll go into a few of the details on things that are changing a little bit. And again, happy to answer questions. some of the work too may also evolve once the new board is formed. So when we look at the full package of bylaws, which is available on the website, I've sort of broken things down into categories. So one of the big pieces, we went through the bylaws and we essentially did what I'm calling alignment updates. So some of the terminology we needed to shift. So terms like executive or council have now been updated to reflect directors or the board of directors. So that's one piece, and that was just a lot of simple kind of reinserting the proper terminology in those bylaws. Some of the things we also went through and we reviewed, and with some advice from legal counsel, made sure that the timelines that we had in our bylaws were actually in alignment with what's required by the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. Some of those are around like notification for voting and those sort of processes. We also strengthened some of the descriptions in terms of what would be required and what the process would be if a member or a director on the board was to be removed, to really clarify that and sort of provide, I guess, some process that is, I guess, defensible and really sort of supports what's required under the Act. We've also changed the terminology again to clarify things. So Jen's role now would become one of an executive director. There was some kind of mismatched terminology, and sometimes chief operating officer was used or senior leadership. So we thought this was an opportunity to really clarify that. And then the final piece was about the indemnities for directors and others who are doing work for the organization. Again, just updating it so it falls under what would be recommended under the NFP Act. So then we get into the bigger changes and the stuff that we really spent our time at consulting from the start with the member survey last summer, and then with the help of council, the governance committee and executive. And so what we've landed on essentially is that we're going to have a board of directors that may include a range of 9 to 12 directors at large. And the reason for the range is really about flexibility. If we specified a specific number of directors, if we ever wanted to go, say, from 9 to 10 directors, we would actually need a bylaw vote at an AGM to be able to do that. So the other way we can do it within the Not-for-Profit Organization Act, which allows a little more flexibility for the SRPC, is to create a range of directors. So based on the organizational needs, the strategic priorities, we can choose to have anywhere from 9 to 12 directors. Within that, we've also adjusted things a little bit for the officer positions, because really the idea with this new structure is the entire board will be really responsible for a lot of that strategic work, the financial oversight of the organization. And so we'll be making those decisions that may have fallen to the executive previously. So there's going to be 3 officer positions, a president, either president-elect or past president, and a treasurer. And then we've also added within the board of directors a few positions that are going to be required representation, with most of the other sort of desired diversity of representation and attributes and experience coming from a matrix that would be worked on and may sort of shift depending on the organization's priorities at different times between the board of directors and the nominations and awards committee. So the required representation would be to have 1 student, resident, or early career member, 1 non-physician member, with the thought that that will really provide us with the ability to have some expertise in a particular area or to provide more community perspectives. Really, again, it may depend, but seeking someone out who's sort of an ally of the SRPC to be able to also look at the work we're doing from a different perspective. The other thing that we're also including within the bylaws is an aim for at least 1 director who will hold validated Indigenous membership or citizenship with a group based in Canada. Within the board of directors, there's going to be 2-year terms that are renewable once, and then in very exceptional circumstances, the bylaws are written that you could have a 3rd term. These are all still sort of approved at the AGM. The term for president-elect, we are recommending that it remain the same. So a 4-year cycle where a president-elect starts, they have a year there, they have 2 years as president and a year as past president. As I mentioned, the plan is to have a skills and attributes matrix to really try to continue to reflect some of the diversity that we really value at the SRPC. So the skills and attributes matrix will be determined between the board and the nominations and awards committee. And the idea of keeping most of that outside the bylaws is, again, to offer some of that flexibility. There's still accountability to members because members have to vote on who the board of directors become. But this allows us flexibility so that we can shift as organizational priorities may shift. And really what we're looking for within this is skills, experience, diversity, and people who can help meet those strategic priorities of the SRPC. The process for now is not recommended to change, so it will still involve a call out to members. There'll be some sort of stated kind of skills or attributes that we're hoping to find. And then the nominations and awards committee would go through their usual process. The other thing we've also strengthened in the board of directors section is the expectation for directors in terms of their responsibilities, things like attending meetings as well. And as I mentioned before, some of the things in terms of the protections that they would have and sort of expectations in terms of doing this work in good faith and guiding the organization. In terms of the piece for council, the bylaws that address this are now speaking to council becoming really an advisory and engagement body and not a governing one for the SRPC. So they are really there, much as they are right now, to provide those member perspectives and advice to the board. So they won't have that fiduciary or legal authority that the board has, but they do have a lot of responsibilities that we are expecting of them. So we see them as the group to advise the board on emerging issues and priorities, provide feedback on programs that we're delivering, service, maybe outreach strategies. We may expect them to act as SRPC ambassadors or identify partnerships and funding opportunities, as well as providing some expertise or support to advocacy efforts. So within the council, we are also proposing that there be a structure, and this will include having a vice chair and a chair. And this group may make formal recommendations to the board. And the idea is, though, that we're trying to separate them out a little bit. So directors will be invited to attend and listen and kind of gain those perspectives, but that the council itself will have the ability to kind of bring forward motions to the board and have them consider those. So council, much like it does right now, will include regional representatives. We are shifting this to be a little more flexible, so it may not be every province and territory, but maybe more regional representatives, chairs of ad hoc committees. And again, these committees are not sort of as strictly defined, recognizing that sometimes there's work that we're doing a lot of in one area, but then as needs shift, then maybe we don't need to have a committee on that and we need to create a new committee. And then there may be other representatives on that council that are determined either by the board or the general membership who feel they should exist on that body. So there's a minimum requirement of a meeting once a year. Right now, our council meets twice a year. And so certainly it would be something that either the board or the council itself may decide they want to continue with twice a year or more based on their needs. The extra element, and I think that this is to link sort of some accountability for the work at council to the board actions and strategic work, is that any motion that council prepares really must be presented at a board meeting and voted upon. So the board still have the ability to decline some of that, but that they really do need to respond and provide sort of some kind of action related to the motions that are presented. Moving on from those two big groups, then the next thing we addressed within the bylaws are the committees. So we've shifted this a little bit. And again, this is about sort of building a governance structure that allows, they use the expression noses in, fingers out when it comes to board work. So the board is really going to be aware of all the work happening, very involved in the strategic work of the SRPC, but most of the sort of day-to-day functioning committee work that's happening in various levels would be more under the responsibility of the executive director. So we've shifted this to include within the bylaws 3 standing committees that would report directly to the board, and we'll have some representation from board members. So those are the Finance and Nominations and Awards Committee and the Governance Committee. All the other committees would report directly to the executive director. They may be asked to present to the board at certain times based on the work they're doing, but really the sort of responsibility and reporting pathways would be through the executive director. Just a little bit of a brief touch on what the sort of 3 board committees would do. I think the Finance Committee one is fairly self-explanatory, but really we want to sort of strengthen what we're doing here and support the treasurer. So looking at financial operations and budgets, reviewing audits, but also thinking about risks and how to sort of align some of the financial planning with our mission and strategic priorities. So this will be chaired by the treasurer, have at least 1 additional director, as well as some of the SRPC staff finance officers, but then others would be determined by a terms of reference and would certainly include other members. Nominations and awards, again, their responsibilities aren't changing too much, aside from looking at those priority attributes, perhaps a little more formally in collaboration with the board of directors. So they would be developing a slate of nominees for voting of director at large and officer roles. And then they also, similar to what they do right now, would be reviewing nominations for chairs of ad hoc committees and recommending these to the board. So within this too, we also are suggesting there be 1 director and then others who would be per the terms of reference. The final committee is a governance committee, and I think this reflects the idea that, we've done a lot of work this year, but there's often ongoing work to look at the processes and how we do things, but also just sort of strengthen the board's capacity within governance and their education as well. There's elements around succession planning and how we sort of promote the opportunities to be on the board and sort of expand the pool of folks involved in the leadership of the SRPC as well. But really look at how we're doing in terms of accountability and transparency and sort of continue looking at those processes. So this too will include some directors as well as others per the terms of reference. The final piece, I guess, to sort of address is how do we do this? So if these are approved, we need to then create an initial board of directors to meet the requirements pretty much immediately. So what we are proposing for the AGM are 2 motions related to this. So one is about the transition of some of the current executive into director or officer roles. And then the second motion will be about the appointment of 3 interim directors. So I've laid out for you here some details in terms of timelines. Most of this sort of aligns with the timelines for these positions that have already actually been approved by the members. So it'll really just be about asking them to continue on in the roles that they've already been voted to take on. I think the only exception to that would be Dr. Marilee Brown, who we're asking to stay on for an additional year to provide some of that experience as we build up a finance committee. The other element will be to get us up to a minimum of 9 directors to have 3 interim directors appointed. Because these are not names that will be sort of voted upon and approved by the membership, according to the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, they cannot serve for any longer than that initial year to get us to another AGM. They may be able to, if the board of directors decide to call a special meeting, we could have a vote to appoint directors who will start serving earlier than a year, but the maximum amount of time they could be served without some sort of a vote by the membership would be the year. So I think one other piece within this that I will point out, even though we are saying that the executive are the ones that will be able, or sorry, the current executive will be able to appoint these directors, the current executive are planning to issue a call for interest for interim directors as part of this process.